The Eternal Bond. Disclaimer: this story is entirely fictional and created solely for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real events or persons is purely coincidental. My name is Marcus, and what I'm about to tell you changed my life forever. It all started last autumn when my grandmother Helena passed away at the remarkable age of 96. Yet she looked barely 60, with skin that seemed to glow from within and eyes sharp as a woman half her age. In our family, this was nothing unusual. We all lived extraordinarily long lives and aged like fine wine, slowly, gracefully, almost supernaturally. My great-uncle Theodore is 104 and still splits his own firewood every morning. My Aunt Vivian turned 89 last spring, but could easily pass for someone in her 50s. Ancient bloodline, my parents always explained with knowing smiles, and our sacred family tradition. Every major holiday, our entire extended family would gather at grandmother's sprawling Victorian mansion on the outskirts of Millbrook. The house had been in our family for over a century, surrounded by dense woods that whispered ancient secrets in the wind. During these gatherings, grandmother would prepare her legendary eternal elixir, a shimmering, golden liquid with an otherworldly taste that seemed to fill you with cosmic energy from the very first sip. After consuming the elixir, everyone felt transformed, energized, almost reborn. Children would stop complaining about minor aches, adults would stand straighter, and the elderly would move with surprising grace. It was our family's most treasured secret, passed down through generations like a sacred ritual. The elixir was served in an ornate crystal chalice that had belonged to our ancestors for centuries. The cup itself seemed to glow with an inner light, and when you drank from it, you could feel warmth spreading through your entire body, connecting you to something greater than yourself. When grandmother Helena died peacefully in her sleep, I inherited the old mansion. The reading of the will was a solemn affair, held in the dusty law office of Mr. Ashworth, who had served our family for decades. As the eldest grandchild, I received not just the property, but what the lawyer called the full responsibility of maintaining the eternal bond. I had no idea what that truly meant until I began exploring the house's hidden corners. The mansion felt different without grandmother's presence. Every creak of the old floorboards seemed to echo with memories, and shadows lingered in corners longer than they should have. I spent my first week there sorting through her belongings, each room revealing more questions than answers. Strange things began happening immediately. Mirrors would fog over without explanation, showing glimpses of faces I didn't recognize. The grandfather clock in the hallway would chime at odd hours, and sometimes I swear I heard whispered conversations coming from empty rooms. In grandmother's private study, behind a false panel I discovered by accident, I found it, an ancient grimoire bound in midnight black leather that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The tome pulsed with an otherworldly energy that made my fingertips tingle when I touched it. My hands trembled with excitement as I carefully opened the mystical book. This was it, the key to our family's longevity, the secret behind our supernatural vitality. I could already imagine continuing the tradition, becoming the new keeper of our ancestral power. But when I found the page for the eternal elixir, my excitement turned to confusion. The page was covered in symbols I didn't recognize, written in what appeared to be silver ink that seemed to move and shift in the candlelight. Instead of a clear recipe, I found only two cryptic instructions. For the foundation, commune with the anchored spirits in the chamber of rest. For the awakening, perform the binding ritual with the sacred implements above. The words seemed to burn themselves into my vision. Why would a simple elixir require communion with spirits? What binding ritual? What was so mystical about our family tradition that it required such elaborate magical preparation? Outside, storm clouds gathered with unnatural speed, and lightning began flashing in patterns that seemed almost like Morse code. I grabbed a lantern and headed for the cellar, driven by curiosity that would soon turn to terror. The cellar had always unsettled me as a child. The air was thick with an otherworldly presence, carrying the scent of burning incense and something else, something that reminded me of ozone after lightning strikes. Stone walls seemed to pulse with their own rhythm, and somewhere in the darkness, I could hear what sounded like distant chanting. Behind rows of dusty, preserving jars and forgotten furniture, I searched for what the grimoire called the Chamber of Rest. In the furthest corner, I found a section of wall covered in strange symbols that glowed faintly in the lantern light. When I traced one of the symbols with my finger, the wall dissolved like mist, revealing a hidden passage. What I discovered beyond defied all rational explanation. A circular chamber stretched before me, its walls covered in intricate carvings that seemed to move in my peripheral vision. In the center of the room stood 12 crystalline pedestals, each one containing what appeared to be a swirling vortex of silver light. These weren't objects, they were pure energy, spirits of some kind, trapped or perhaps willingly bound within the crystal formations. As I stepped closer, the spirits began to react to my presence. The silver light grew brighter, and I could almost make out faces within the swirling energy, the faces of my ancestors. Grandmother Helena's spirit smiled at me from the nearest pedestal, her essence radiating the same warmth I remembered from her hugs. On a stone altar sat another ancient book, this one written in multiple languages spanning centuries. The entries described something that challenged everything I thought I knew about death and family bonds. When a member of our family died, their spirit didn't move on to whatever lies beyond. Instead, they chose to remain, binding their life essence to these crystal anchors. Their accumulated wisdom, their life energy, their very souls were preserved to serve the family for eternity. The eternal elixir wasn't just a drink, it was a communion with the spirits of our ancestors. When we consumed it, we weren't just gaining physical vitality, we were connecting with generations of accumulated knowledge and supernatural power. But the book revealed something else, something that made my blood run cold. The spirits required regular communion to maintain their anchor to our world. Without it, they would fade away forever, and with them, the supernatural protection that kept our family from aging normally. I was beginning to understand that we weren't just blessed with longevity. We were bound by an ancient pact that demanded absolute participation from every living family member. The attic stairs creaked ominously as I climbed toward the highest point of the house, the grimoire clutched tightly in my hands. Here, beneath the slanted roof where moonlight filtered through ancient windows, Grandmother had stored the most sacred family artifacts. I found what the grimoire called the sacred implements in an ornate chest that seemed to hum with magical energy. Inside, nestled in compartments lined with black velvet, were 12 silver amulets, each one inscribed with the name of a living family member and glowing with the same ethereal light I'd seen in the cellar. My amulet was there, newly crafted, its surface warm to the touch and pulsing in rhythm with my heartbeat. When I picked it up, visions flashed through my mind, generations of my ancestors performing the binding ritual, connecting their life force to the family collective. A final tome lay at the bottom of the chest, and its contents revealed the complete truth of our family's supernatural bond. The awakening wasn't about physical offerings, it was about spiritual connection. During each gathering, every family member had to wear their amulet and willingly open their soul to the ancestral spirits. This created a psychic bridge between the living and the dead, allowing the accumulated life energy of our ancestors to flow into the present generation. The ritual required complete emotional honesty, genuine love for the family, true gratitude for the ancestors, and absolute commitment to maintaining the eternal bond. Any deception, any reluctance, any attempt to fake the connection would weaken the entire network. As I read these revelations, the amulet in my hands grew warmer, and I began to hear whispers not threatening or evil, but loving voices of grandparents and great-grandparents welcoming me into the family's greatest secret. But with understanding came a terrible realization about the price of knowledge. The autumn equinox was approaching, our next major family gathering. For the first time in my life, I decided not to attend. The weight of the family secret felt overwhelming, and I needed time to process what I had learned. I called my mother with a carefully crafted excuse about having severe flu symptoms. "That's unfortunate, dear," she said, and I detected genuine sadness in her tone. The communion is always weaker when someone chooses absence over connection. I ignored the comment, convincing myself I needed space to think. I felt justified in my decision, believing I deserved time to come to terms with our family's supernatural nature. But isolation from the family bond came with consequences I never anticipated. Within days, I began experiencing strange symptoms. My reflection in mirrors started looking older, more tired. My hands developed tremors I'd never had before. Most disturbing were the dreams, or perhaps they were visions of the ancestral spirits calling out to me, their silver light dimming with each passing night. A week after the gathering, my phone rang at 3 a.m. My mother's voice carried a panic I'd never heard before. "Marcus, something terrible is happening. The family bond is weakening. You need to come home immediately." I drove through the night, my symptoms worsening with each mile. By the time I reached the family home, I could barely keep my hands steady on the steering wheel. Uncle Theodore, who had seemed invincible just weeks ago, now moved like a man carrying an invisible weight. His amulet, which should have glowed with inner light, hung dark and lifeless around his neck. Aunt Vivian's usual radiance had faded to a dull pallor that made her look decades older. "The spirits are fading," my mother explained, her own amulet flickering weakly. "When you didn't participate in the communion, it broke the circle. The ancestral bond requires all living family members to maintain its strength." Standing in that room, surrounded by my rapidly weakening family, I began to understand the true nature of our supernatural gift and its terrible price. The family bond wasn't just a tradition or a magical ritual. It was a living entity, a supernatural organism that required the participation of every member to survive. We were all psychically linked, our life forces intertwined in ways that transcended normal family relationships. When someone broke the chain through absence or unwillingness, the entire network began to collapse. The ancestral spirits, denied the full power of family unity, started losing their connection to our world. Without their accumulated life energy flowing to the living, we began aging at a normal human rate, something our bodies, adapted over generations to supernatural longevity, couldn't handle. My cousin David, who had missed the spring ceremony due to work commitments, had experienced complete spiritual disconnection. His amulet had gone permanently dark, and without the ancestral protection, his body had tried to catch up to his chronological age all at once. The medical examiner called it sudden organ failure, but I knew the truth: he had been severed from the eternal bond. My mother gathered the family in the mansion's main hall, where portraits of our ancestors seemed to watch us with knowing eyes. The crystal chalice sat empty on the mantel, its usual inner glow reduced to barely visible flickers. "The winter solstice is our most important communion," she said, her voice carrying the weight of generations. "It's when the ancestral spirits are strongest, when the bond can be renewed and strengthened. We need everyone there, Marcus. Not just for our sake, but for the sake of the spirits who chose to stay connected to us across the veil of death." Looking at my family's faces, I saw not just the fear of aging or death, but genuine love for the ancestors who had sacrificed their eternal rest to protect us. The spirits in the cellar weren't trapped. They were devoted guardians who had chosen family over paradise. Now, as the winter solstice approaches, I face a decision that will determine not just my fate, but the fate of everyone I've ever loved, both living and dead. The silver amulet sits before me on my desk, its surface reflecting candlelight like captured starshine. When I hold it, I can feel the faint whispers of my ancestors, their love and wisdom calling to me across the boundaries between life and death. Grandmother Helena's spirit feels closest, her presence warm and comforting, just as it was when I was a child. I have 3 choices, each carrying its own profound consequences. I can return home, embrace the family bond completely, and join the eternal communion that has protected our bloodline for generations. This means accepting my role as a keeper of ancestral wisdom, a bridge between the living and the dead, a guardian of supernatural knowledge that most people couldn't even imagine. I can continue my isolation, maintaining my independence but watching as the family bond crumbles, the ancestral spirits fade into oblivion, and everyone I love ages rapidly toward death. This path preserves my individual freedom but destroys centuries of accumulated wisdom and love. Or I can search for a third option, a way to honor our ancestors while perhaps finding a new form of connection that doesn't require such absolute commitment from every family member. The mansion's library contains thousands of books on supernatural phenomena, ancient rituals, and family magic. Tonight, I'm returning there to research everything I can about spiritual bonds, ancestral magic, and the possibility of modifying ancient pacts. Because somewhere in those dusty tomes might lie the key to evolution rather than dissolution, a way to transform our family tradition into something that honors the past while allowing for individual choice in the future. The spirits in the cellar aren't evil or demanding. They're loving guardians who want what's best for their descendants. Perhaps, with enough research and understanding, I can find a way to maintain that loving connection without the absolute requirements that have governed our family for centuries. Tomorrow, I begin my search for answers. The winter solstice gives me exactly 13 days to discover if ancient magic can evolve, if family bonds can be modified, and if love between the living and the dead can transcend the rigid structures of traditional supernatural pacts. The wind outside my window carries whispers that sound almost like encouragement. Even in my uncertainty, I feel the warm presence of my ancestors, and I believe they want me to find a solution that honors both our family's eternal bond and the individual choices of future generations. The search begins at midnight. If this supernatural family mystery captivated you, hit that like button. Your support keeps these mystical tales alive. Subscribe for the thrilling continuation. Next week, I'll reveal what Marcus discovers in his research and whether ancient family magic can evolve with the times. Comment below. Would you embrace a supernatural family bond that connects you to your ancestors forever, or would you choose individual freedom even at the cost of losing that eternal connection? What would you do in Marcus's position? Your engagement fuels these otherworldly stories. Final reminder, all stories on this channel are works of fiction created purely for entertainment. Any resemblance to real events, persons, or supernatural phenomena is entirely coincidental.